Would I prefer to use the modern digital technology that you've all got today? You bet your sweet life I would. It would have made my filming life a hell of a lot easier, and not only that, the quality of the results would have been so much better. You people today have got small digital cameras that are far more light sensitive than the best film camera that there ever was. They've got good colour values, low noise and built-in sound. You've got LED lighting that uses a fraction of the battery power and is incredibly easy to carry compared with my huge batteries. Sometimes I wonder just how many of you think just now and again how difficult it all used to be.
If you like wild country and a change from the Potts domestic, try the Potts Majestic among the Pennines, though even then you won't be able to get away from the range. But the Pennine Range is a never-ending source of wonderment to the explorer, if only because of its potholes. Here, hundreds of feet below a great limestone tract in Yorkshire and Derbyshire, are scores of rugged natural caverns, and most of them can only be viewed from above. But seeing that we're old friends, let's follow our guide and go potholing together. Now do be careful of that rope ladder. Ladies and gents, we're now 300 feet below the surface. A bit dark, but didn't someone say that ladies can always see in the dark? Pardon the merry quip. Ah, here come the men with their torches. It's just as well, for we can hear the water falling quite close, and bold as we are, there are a few boulders to get round.
In the early 1900s, before television, the main outlet for film was the cinema. And that meant that companies like Pathé News shot on 35mm film. Large cameras that needed a lot, and I mean a lot, of light. Filming underground was a huge problem, even for the big boys. Unless they had generators with huge cables and big lights, the only available source of light was the magnesium flare. But a big flare could fill even a huge chamber with smoke within minutes. Probably the earliest real cave filming in England, other than in accessible show caves, was done in 1933 by Edgar Trapman, more often called simply Trat. He'd been trained in dentistry at Bristol University and was now working in Singapore. But in the summer of that year, he was back in England. He already owned two 16mm cameras, a Cine Kodak and an Agfa MoveX. He'd been a keen caver since university and decided that he wanted to use his time in the Medlibs to experiment with filming underground. As ever, the problem was lighting. He decided to try the large paraffin burning Tilly lamps that were used to light building sites. He would use three, two big ones and one smaller. The only suitable film available was Kodak 16mm black and white panchromatic film, which had only become available a year or two before. It could be processed to give a direct positive image without the need for an additional print, but it only had a speed of about 100 ASA. He would also need the help of about 8 or 9 of his caving friends, who no doubt had no idea what they were getting themselves into. When he tested the lights in the caving hut at Barrington, it showed that even at his maximum aperture, the light was insufficient. As a consequence, he decided to run the camera at 12 frames rather than the standard 24 frames per second. This had the effect of doubling the exposure time, but when the film was projected, it speeded everything up. Even though they were asked to act slowly, they seemed to be in a hell of a hurry to drink their cups of tea. The The main shots were to be done in Goatchurch Cavern, with some additional shots in Reed's Cavern and elsewhere on subsequent weekends. The actors were told to move at half speed, which sometimes worked, but a lot of the time didn't. All told, some 800 feet of film was exposed, with reasonable results, but unfortunately, a problem with the Agfa camera, possibly caused by the damp conditions, caused the film to slip in the gate, and several hundred feet of film were unusable. Nevertheless, the exercise was a great indication of just what could be possible. I wasn't even born until 4 years later. As far as I can remember, it was in 1964 when I was working for the BBC sound department in the dubbing theatre at Alexandra Palace that I found out that I could get my hands on short ends, the leftover 16mm reversal black and white film from the news cameraman, and even, on the quiet, get it processed for free. It's sobering to think that it was 31 years after Chapman's first filming attempt that I bought myself a second-hand Bolex camera with the intention of filming in caves. Not a lot had changed, but one recent development promised to make things a little easier. The quartz halogen lamp had become available. At 12 volts 100 watt and very compact, it seemed perfect for underground film lighting. In an attempt to make the lighting as authentic as possible, I adapted a couple of miners' headlamps to take a quartz halogen bulb, which would then be powered by a pair of 6-volt motorcycle cells which conveniently fitted into an ammo box. And being a sound man, I was also recording sound on a Euro tape recorder. 5 of us spent a bank holiday weekend down Gaping Gill. We all camped in Mud Hall in a single tent. It was all very cosy, until I got pushed out under the tent wall and finished up on the slope leading down to the drop to the chamber floor. The results were not good, very contrasty, soot and whitewash. I had simply established, with an awful lot of effort from a lot of people, that putting the lights on helmets just did not work. Trapp was not back on leave in Bristol until 1937. He now turned his attention to Lamb Lear. And with Wessex also involved, he had plenty of helpers. The impetus was that the film was intended to be shown at the second BCRA conference in July of that year. He had a new secret weapon, an extra industrial tilly lamp that gave even more light than the others. It had 3 mantles, and they called it Big Bertha. He also had an extra single burner lamp. The consequent improvement in the shots is noticeable, but he is still having to run at half speed, which is apparent, particularly when one of the cavers falls. It seems at double speed. Whatever, the filming was clearly a great success, and the 15-minute edit was very well received at the conference. Nevertheless, the limitations of using tilly lamps were also apparent. Not only were they cumbersome and the mantles fragile, but they became very hot and there were a number of minor burn injuries. It was tragic events during the exploration of the Pierre St. Martin in the French Pyrenees that would bring cave filming to an international audience. In 1951, Ezra Tassieff and Marcel Lubin explored downstream from the bottom of the 1,000-foot deep Lepino shaft. They filmed using the only viable lighting option, magnesium flares. It made for dramatic shots, but it must have filled the passages with smoke. It was on the following year, however, they returned from a long exploration and struggled to find the way out of Salle Elizabeth Castre through the boulders. Could lingering smoke from the flares have been a contributing factor? The sad story of Lubin's fatal fall, when the shackle that secured him to the winch came undone, would assure that the footage would go worldwide. In 1953, Eli Simpson, on behalf of the BSA, embarked on a 16mm film project to be called The Birth of a Yorkshire River. It was intended to present caving to a wider audience. Perhaps the Pierre St. Martin incident or the negative public reaction to it had some influence. Eddie Percy, who ran a business from the yard where the BSA was now based, had a 16mm Bolex camera and a projector with which he did local film shows. Other than that, they had very few facilities and equally little expertise. Simi, never one to do things by halves, eventually decided to use a large generator and run thick cables to power a bank of 250 volt, 500 watt photoflood bulbs. Ingleborough Cave provided an ideal location. With the generator parked outside, they could run heavy cables into the cave and power 4 500 watt bulbs, 2 in each of their specially made reflector boxes. The results were excellent. They even had enough light at the right colour temperature to briefly test the Kodachrome colour film, which was now available. Even so, this equipment severely limited the available underground locations. These shots were in Gatekirk Cave in Chapelerdale, but there were few other options available.
From Castleton set out the team of rescuers on their last bid to save Neil Moss. The young man was
then in 1959, caving was making headlines again for all the wrong reasons. It was a Peak Cavern in Derbyshire, and once more Pathy News were on location. This tragic incident was exactly the sort of sensational story the press loved, and it would negatively impact the public view of caving and the sport's relationship with the press for many years.
Courage was not enough, and still Neil was breathing. Perhaps the oxygen cylinders would keep him alive and give the rescuers time to make new attempts. Helping these men was June Bailey, 18, a Manchester typist. She crawled to within 40 feet of the young man before foul air drove the brave girl back.
Experiments which tackled the technical problems of true underground filming continued, but mostly at club level. This one from the Wessex is particularly relevant because a commentary added in later years by the filmmaker himself, Maurice Hewins, explains exactly what was involved technically.
Our Farnham group had only been caving about 18 months when we decided we'd have a go at filming underground. We coincided the trip with the youth club trip so we could borrow lots of motorcycle batteries, and we arranged these in banks of 4 in 3 boxes. You can see the boxes here, and these were coupled to these lights which ran off 24 volts. We decided it would be best if we went into the cave overnight so we could have the place to ourselves, and we used some of the youth club lads as Sherpas to get the equipment over to the cave entrance. This film is a composite of 2 filming attempts. First was made in April 1960 and the second in March 1961. The first film we used was Gaberpan Ultra, which was about 60 ASA I think. But we later went on to Perutz 400, which, although a bit more grainy, produced better results with the lights available. In fact, these first sequences are the ones that were taken on the Perutz film. We weren't too fussy about scripting in those days, we just were trying to get shots of cavers going down caves. And there's a fairly rare picture of me in my old white caving helmet. The carbide lamp and an improvised electric light I seem to be wearing there, and the bell battery on the top of the helmet.
The Mendip Rescue Organisation were also filming. Possibly they saw it as a way to help raise funds.
They're ready to go through now. The first diver has gone through and the subject is being taken through now. In the meantime, the lifeline is being gently pulled from the near side, and the air tube is also drawn back so that there are no coils left lying about inside the sump itself. Here is the first diver just coming through on the way back. And here comes the subject, followed by the second diver. The subject is brought onto the land, and then, after he has had his mask taken off, he signifies that he has enjoyed his trip.
But it would be an expedition from France that would be the first to truly bring cave exploration at its very best to a wider audience. The Gouffre was to become the first cave to be explored to a depth of over 1,000 meters. I happened to be working in the dubbing theatre at BBC Ealing when it was given an English soundtrack for broadcast. I seem to remember it was renamed the Starless River, but whatever, it was far better than all that had gone before. Film made a big impression on me and many others. A still photograph in the book gives some indication of just what huge effort went into it. George Murray's film still remains and will always remain an absolute classic. I've told the story of filming at Sunset Pod elsewhere, so I won't go into it here, but it was a landmark in several ways, not in the least for me personally. The equipment was simple, with two specially constructed 12-volt, 100-watt quartz halogen lamps, powered by light but expensive silver zinc cells. A blue electric camera was used underground. Two things particularly made the filming of this tragic rescue attempt different to what had gone before. Mainly, of course, because it was the first time that actuality film had been shot of real dramatic caving events as they happened. Secondly, as I actually worked for the BBC Film Unit's sound department at the time, I realised the importance of sound, and after the actual event, put a lot of effort into recording realistic sound to accompany the previously silent footage.
You're doing very well on the way out. You haven't too far to go now, so you can keep the pressure up and get you out right.
After Sunset was transmitted, I desperately wanted to make a film to show the more positive aspects of caving. So I left the BBC and moved into our caving hut in the Yorkshire Dales with the intention of making my own films. Of course, I fully realised that making a professional quality 16mm film needed a lot of resources and a lot of money, neither of which I had, so I was going out on a limb. Not only was 16mm film stock expensive, but then it needed to be processed and printed before days later you even know what your shots look like. Then of course there was the editing. The complex editing process required weeks in a professional editing room. The footage had to be viewed, assessed, and hundreds of shots needed to be physically cut out and then reassembled using a tape splicer. Any location sound needed to be transferred to 16mm magnetically coated stock called SEPMAG. The narration had to be recorded and multiple 16mm soundtracks created to be eventually mixed down in a dubbing theatre. It was far from just a matter of having a camera and lights. much as I was now enjoying living in Horton in Ribblesdale, I had no job and a rapidly decreasing bank balance. I urgently needed a commission. In spite of the success of Sunset Pot, that wouldn't be easy. The proposal that I put forward in June 1968 to make a film about the discoveries earlier that year in Gaping Gill was turned down. The year that Sunday at Sunset Pot was filmed was also the year that the BBC started to transmit in colour. The goalposts had moved. Of course, colour film needed more light and was less tolerant than black and white. Back in 1966, the year before Sunset Pot, I had already been experimenting with filming in colour. And after some successful tests in Yorkshire, I had launched an expedition to Gavarnie, close to the Spanish border in the French Pyrenees, to film the famous ice caves found by Norbert Cassirer. The equipment list shows that I had 3 250-watt lamp units, which used double-ended 30-volt bulbs. The batteries had to be constructed using ex-army nickel-cadmium cells and were charged using a small Honda generator. It was a great trip and we came back with some nice footage, but I never had the possibility to edit it. Now I wondered if the BBC might be interested in putting something together. I contacted Brian Branston of the Travel and Adventure department. He liked the footage, but there was not enough to fill his 1-hour World About Us slot. Had I considered making a film in England? I pointed out that I had put forward a proposal months earlier, but it had been turned down. It was the beginning of May 1969 when eventually I signed the contract. Reading it now, a few things are striking. Filming to be completed within 6 months. In fact, it would take me over a year. I was paid $1,270, very little for the time and the work involved, even in those days. Brightly they paid for film and processing and post-production. But the final item is intriguing. 93 batteries. Why 93? I seem to think I was using 7 ampere-hour nickel-cadmium cells, which I wired together to make 12-volt units, and possibly 24 or 30-volt battery packs, but I don't really remember.
Another small group of cavers arrive at Ingleby. Why have they come?
The filming would be a huge learning curve. Looking back, in spite of my BBC experience, I was more a caver that wanted to make films than a filmmaker that wanted to film caves. Also, normally a TV shoot of this nature would have a sizable team of qualified people. Now there was just me, a few mates, and the endless number of helpers that I would need to recruit weekend after weekend, all unpaid. No wonder I earned the reputation of being able to empty a pub just by walking into it. I'd set myself, perhaps foolishly, to push the limits and to film in many of the most extreme parts of Gaping Gill. Disappointment Pod, Stream Passage Pod, even Car Pod, South Craven Passage, and then the new discoveries of Whitson series from Far Country. I would need as many as 6 battery packs and a lot of people on most of these trips, and soon learned that tired, cold, pissed off cavers don't take much care of your precious gear. Apart from keeping the equipment working, recruiting helpers for the next shoot and working around the weather, it would all be an enormous task. In retrospect, it was much too ambitious. Much of the footage, hundreds of man-hours of work, would finish up on the cutting room floor. The film was supposed to end with an exploratory dive by Mike Wooding in the far reaches of Ingleby Cave. Then the clever bastard got through into new airspace. Suddenly the BBC gained new interest. Was a connection between Gaping Gill and Ingleby Cave imminent? A producer, Derek Smith, was sent up. Exactly how far are the caves apart? How much will it cost to make this connection happen? Bring in a rival diver, Tom Brown. Why aren't the divers diving every day if they really want the connection? In the end, Derek Smith also wrote an article for the Weekend Telegraph. He probably made more money in 1 month of being involved with the film than I had made over the year. Not that that was difficult. It was my introduction to the commercial realities of television. Back to the equipment. The BBC now wanted underwater shots of Mike Wooding and Tom Brown. They would send up a housing and lights, and we could do it in the river at night. A wooden box arrived. We thought the housing was inside. No, that was the housing. As far as I remember, it was about 18 inches long, 15 inches square with perspex ends, front and back, and an Arriflex camera sat mounted in the middle. No viewfinder, you just look through the box. It also floated like a boat until we wrapped it with several weight belts. The shots were done at Stainford Foss in murky water. We needed to run power cables all the way from the farm for the underwater lights. It was a bit different from using a GoPro. For me, many films were to follow, each one a new challenge, but each one taking a little technical step forward. Electric camera, battery charging a mile underground in Castleguard. Sync sound on Beneath the Pennines. Macro in Speleogenesis. More extreme expeditions. Improved, faster film stocks. Customised expedition battery chargers. Even bigger lights. Then also a limited exploration into cave diving. Even for my epic cave diving story series, I was forced to use powerful lights and large 16mm underwater housings that would only shoot 5 minutes of film without coming to the surface to reload.
Believe it or not.
In 1991, at the age of 54, I was asked to film a historic caving event for Yorkshire Television. Jeff Yeadon and Jeff Crosley were to dive the underwater connection under Kingsdale, connecting King Pot and Killed Head. All the underground shots, and particularly the underwater shots, were to be shot on high 8 camcorders. It was so different from my experience on Cave Diving Story, and the results, even then, were pretty much of similar quality. It was clearly the way to go, even though at the time it only made a short calendar slot. Then in March 1992, I had the opportunity to work in Ledger Gear Cave for National Geographic Television. Although professional Beta SP video cameras were now used throughout television, National Geographic insisted that it must be shot on 16mm film. It was better quality, they insisted. But how nice it would have been to be able to see how your lighting worked on the spot, particularly as they immediately transferred all the rushes onto tape and edited on tape. No sooner was I back than I was filming again on high 8 tape, the epic rescue in Sleet's Gill.
Right, so what happened?
Then in late 1992 in China, I was supposed to film in 16mm. After I managed to convince the director that true actuality exploration filming on 16mm was impossible, I was allowed to try some sequences on video, on a small amateur Sony Hi8 Handycam that I just happened to have with me. It was a revelation. Compact, less lighting problems, built-in sound, no clapperboards, no film changing. So many of the things I had sought after on 16mm were now within reach. Real, actual exploration filming was suddenly possible. What an amazing journey cave filming has made since then. With digital recording on memory, sensitivity that rivals the human eye, even smaller, compact, waterproof cameras, and now quadcopters. The quality of both video and still photography have finally opened the public's eyes the amazing wonders of the underground world, both above and below water. But filmmaking is not just about nice images, however good. It's also about the human experience. It's about real situations, real people, which is why television so often misses the mark by playing safe with its often superficial treatment and presenters. I well remember the many times when I was in disagreement, I was told by TV people, "You want to make films for cavers. We want to make them for the general public." And that just wasn't true. But I wanted them to be right for both. In the end, making films is as much about the editing and the storytelling as it is about the filming. But then, editing is a whole new learning curve. Titles, dissolves, fades, insets, graphics, effects that used to take days and cost a fortune, now can be done at home, on a computer, and take minutes. This brilliant new technology means that we can not only do what has largely been done before better and more easily, but it's also radically pushing the limits year by year of what is possible. And where that takes us is entirely up to you guys.